3 days after burying his father, Michael Carter walked into a lawyer's office expecting to inherit the company he had spent 20 years helping build. Instead, he was handed $1. $1. That was the value placed on a son who sacrificed birthdays, relationships, holidays, and nearly half his life working beside his father. Witnesses would later remember the silence that followed. Some described it as disbelief. Others described it as humiliation. Michael barely heard the rest of the will. His younger half-brother, Jason Carter, couldn't hide his satisfaction. His stepmother, Victoria Carter, sat calmly in her chair as though she had already known exactly what was coming. At that moment, Michael believed he had lost everything. What he did not know was that the reading of the will was only the beginning. Hidden inside old family records, forgotten photographs, private journals, and sealed legal documents was a secret stretching back more than 30 years. A secret that would raise a disturbing question. Did his father truly choose to erase him from the family legacy, or had someone carefully rewritten the ending? Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This story begins long before the reading of the will. To understand why Michael Carter found himself standing in that lawyer's office, staring at a document that seemed to erase his entire life, we have to go back to his childhood. Michael was 8 years old when his mother passed away after a long illness, and family friends remember him as a quiet child who suddenly had to grow up much faster than anyone expected. His father, Robert Carter, was building a business empire at the time. Long hours became even longer. Meetings replaced family dinners. Work replaced grieving. Yet despite the hardships, Michael idolized his father. He believed every sacrifice had a purpose. He believed that one day they would build something together. Years later, when Robert remarried Victoria Carter, Michael welcomed her into the family. At first, she appeared supportive and caring. She encouraged him in school, attended family gatherings, and spoke often about unity. Looking back, several relatives would later admit there were warning signs. Small moments that seemed insignificant at the time. Decisions that always benefited Victoria or her son Jason. Or conversations that ended when Michael entered the room. Preferences that became patterns, patterns that eventually became impossible to ignore. As the years passed, Michael devoted himself to the family company. While friends pursued careers elsewhere, he stayed. While others traveled, started businesses, or explored different opportunities, Michael worked 60 and sometimes 70 hours a week, helping expand his father's empire. Employees respected him. Clients trusted him. Many assumed he would eventually become chief executive officer. Even competitors spoke openly about Michael being the natural successor. Jason, meanwhile, enjoyed a very different lifestyle. He rarely remained in one position for long. He moved between departments, pursued personal projects, and often disappeared from daily operations entirely. Yet somehow, a praise always seemed to follow him. Promotions appeared effortlessly. Credit for successful initiatives often found its way to him. Michael noticed the imbalance but remained silent. He convinced himself that loyalty would eventually be rewarded. He believed hard work would speak louder than politics. He believed his father saw everything. What Michael failed to understand was that not every battle takes place in public. Some battles happen quietly, behind closed doors, where influence can reshape perceptions long before anyone realizes what is happening. 6 months before Robert Carter's death, something changed. Several executives later recalled unusual behavior. Meetings were canceled. Access became restricted. Victoria began controlling much of Robert's schedule, and employees who once met directly with him suddenly found themselves speaking through intermediaries. Michael noticed the change immediately. Phone calls became harder to return. Invitations became less frequent. Family dinners disappeared. During one visit, Michael claimed his father seemed distracted and uncomfortable, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the opportunity. That meeting haunted him for months afterward. According to Michael, Robert repeatedly glanced toward the doorway whenever sensitive subjects arose. It was a small detail. Yet after everything that followed, it became impossible to forget. Then Robert's health rapidly deteriorated. Hospital visits increased. Public appearances stopped. Family members gathered around him. Within weeks, the founder of one of the region's most successful companies was gone. The funeral drew hundreds of mourners. Business leaders, politicians, employees, and longtime friends filled the church. Everyone expected Michael to carry the family legacy forward. Nobody imagined what would happen next. When the lawyer finally read the will, the room changed forever. Jason inherited controlling interests in the company. Victoria inherited the mansion, investment portfolios, luxury properties, and significant financial assets. Michael received $1. The decision shocked everyone present. Even people who barely knew the family questioned how such a result could make sense. Michael himself remained composed, at least on the surface. Those closest to him later described a different reality, and they described a man struggling to understand how 2 decades of loyalty could end with a single sentence on a piece of paper. News of the inheritance spread quickly through business circles. Rumors emerged almost immediately. Some speculated there had been a falling out. Others suggested Michael had hidden misconduct. Online discussions filled with theories, yet no evidence supported any of them. What existed instead was confusion. And then, just when Michael believed matters could not become more painful, an unexpected envelope arrived. The envelope contained a photograph. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. A faded image showing a young Robert Carter standing beside an unidentified woman and a small child. The photograph had been taken decades before Michael was born. There was no note, no explanation, no return address. Only the image. Most people would have dismissed it. Michael could not. Something about the photograph felt deliberate. Someone wanted him to see it. Someone wanted him asking questions. Within days, he hired a private investigator. What began as a search for answers soon uncovered a trail of inconsistencies. Property records contained unusual transfers. Financial activity appeared around critical dates. Legal filings contained discrepancies that demanded explanation. The deeper investigators looked, the more complicated the story became. Every answer seemed to produce 2 new questions. And then they discovered something hidden in a rented storage unit that had not been opened in years. Inside were boxes filled with letters, journals, photographs, and audio recordings. It was enough material to rewrite everything Michael thought he knew about his family. One journal belonged to Robert Carter himself. Entry after entry described concerns about trust, influence, and control. Several passages referenced disagreements involving estate planning. Others hinted at fears that certain individuals were manipulating information around him. Michael read every page. Then he reached an entry written only months before Robert's death. That entry changed everything. According to Robert's own words, he intended to revise portions of his estate plan because he feared someone was attempting to interfere with his wishes. Investigators immediately focused on the final will. Handwriting experts were consulted. Legal specialists reviewed signatures. What they found stunned everyone involved, and the signature on the final version did not appear consistent with authenticated samples. Questions multiplied overnight. Had Robert's final will been altered? Had someone forged critical documents? And if so, who stood to benefit? As forensic examinations continued, pressure mounted. Victoria denied all wrongdoing. Jason claimed he knew nothing about estate planning. Lawyers exchanged accusations. The media followed every development. Yet the greatest revelation was still waiting. Hidden among Robert's papers was evidence of a second will. Unlike the document presented after his death, this version contained dramatically different instructions. Locating it became a race against time. Months later, a sealed safety deposit box provided the answer. Inside were legal documents, personal letters, and a recorded message from Robert himself. Speaking directly to Michael, Robert explained that he feared attempts would be made to alter his legacy. He described contingency plans designed to protect his true intentions. The company, according to those instructions, would be shared among family members. But Michael would inherit something entirely separate. A large tract of land purchased decades earlier and largely forgotten by everyone else. At first, the land seemed insignificant. Victoria and Jason reportedly considered it worthless. Then developers announced plans for a major commercial project in the area. Overnight, the property's value soared beyond anyone's expectations. Analysts estimated it was worth more than the company itself. The irony was impossible to ignore. The son who received $1 had unknowingly inherited the most valuable asset of all. Yet for Michael, the money was not the greatest victory. The greatest victory came from learning the truth. The photograph finally made sense. The woman standing beside Robert in that faded image was connected to a chapter of family history Michael had never known. The records preserved in storage revealed that his father had spent years trying to protect both his family and his legacy. The disinheritance was never meant to happen. The betrayal was real. But it did not come from the father Michael loved. By the time the legal battles ended, relationships across the family had been shattered. Trust was gone. Reputations had been damaged. Courtrooms replaced family gatherings. Yet amid all the conflict, one fact remained. Michael's father had never abandoned him. For years, Michael believed he had been rejected by the man whose approval meant everything to him. In reality, the opposite was true. The final message Robert left behind made that clear. It was not a message about money. It was not a message about business. It was a message about family, resilience, and the importance of holding on to truth when everyone around you is trying to rewrite it. And perhaps that is why this story continues to resonate. Because the deepest wounds are rarely caused by strangers. They come from the people we trust most, the people whose choices shape our lives long after they are gone. And the question remains, if you were Michael Carter, after learning everything he learned, would you forgive the people who tried to erase you? Or would some betrayals remain impossible to forget? Now, the question of whether Michael Carter had been betrayed by his own father quickly became the center of attention. Family friends debated it. Former employees discussed it behind closed doors. Business reporters speculated endlessly. Yet beneath all the rumors, one uncomfortable reality remained. Nobody could explain why a man would leave $1 to the son who had spent 20 years helping build his empire. The explanation offered by Victoria Carter was simple. She claimed Robert had become disappointed in Michael over the years. She suggested there had been private disagreements the public never knew about. Jason Carter eagerly supported that version of events. During conversations with reporters, he spoke carefully, portraying himself as someone who simply respected his father's final wishes. To outsiders, their story sounded reasonable. To Michael, it sounded impossible. He had spent the last years of his father's life handling major business operations, negotiating contracts, and protecting the company through difficult economic periods. If Robert truly wanted him gone, why had he trusted him with so much responsibility until the very end? The more Michael thought about it, the less sense it made. Certain memories refused to leave him alone. One in particular kept returning. About 3 months before Robert's death, Michael had visited him at the family mansion. The visit lasted less than 20 minutes. Victoria interrupted twice. Jason arrived unexpectedly halfway through the conversation. Yet before the meeting ended, Robert had gripped Michael's arm with unusual force and looked directly into his eyes. According to Michael, and his father seemed desperate to say something important. But before he could continue, Victoria entered the room carrying paperwork that required immediate attention. The moment vanished. At the time, Michael dismissed it. Now, after receiving $1 from the estate, that memory felt entirely different. What had Robert wanted to tell him? And why did it seem as though someone was always nearby whenever sensitive conversations might occur? Those questions became even more urgent when another unexpected development occurred. 2 days after the will reading, attorney Daniel Harris received an anonymous letter at his office. Daniel had served as legal counsel for the Carter family for nearly 15 years. He was known for being meticulous, discreet, and extremely cautious. When his assistant placed the envelope on his desk, but nothing about it appeared unusual, no return address, no identifying marks, just a standard envelope containing a single typed message. The note was brief, only one sentence, yet those words immediately captured Daniel's attention. The message read, "The wrong will was read." No signature followed, no explanation accompanied it. Most attorneys might have dismissed it as a prank. Daniel could not. He had handled enough estates to recognize when something felt wrong. And from the moment he read those 5 words, a feeling he could not ignore began following him. Daniel reviewed the estate documents again. Then he reviewed them a second time. Everything appeared legitimate. Every signature seemed present. Every page looked properly prepared. Yet the anonymous letter continued troubling him. Why would someone risk sending such a message unless they believed there was truth behind it? Meanwhile, Michael had started conducting his own quiet investigation. He avoided public statements and ignored requests for interviews. Instead, he focused on gathering information. The first person he contacted was an executive named Charles Whitmore. Charles had worked alongside Robert Carter for more than 30 years. If anyone understood the inner workings of the family and the business, it was him. Their meeting took place in a small restaurant far from company headquarters. Michael expected reassurance. Instead, Charles offered something else entirely. According to Charles, Robert had become increasingly isolated during the final year of his life. Meetings were restricted, and longtime employees found themselves excluded from important decisions. Access to Robert became more difficult than ever before. Several executives privately complained about Victoria's growing influence over company matters. Yet nobody challenged her openly. Robert's declining health made confrontation risky. More importantly, nobody wanted to create family conflict while he was battling serious medical problems. Charles then revealed something that immediately caught Michael's attention. 6 months before Robert died, a private meeting took place involving Victoria, Jason, and an estate planning specialist. Michael had not been invited. When he asked why, nobody provided a clear answer. At the time, Charles assumed it was routine. Looking back, he was no longer so certain. As pieces slowly began coming together, another mystery emerged. Several former household employees who once worked at the Carter mansion described unusual events during Robert's final months. One caretaker claimed important documents frequently disappeared from Robert's study only to reappear later. Another employee recalled overhearing arguments concerning legal paperwork. None of these stories proved wrongdoing. Yet together, they painted a troubling picture. Michael listened carefully to every account. The more information he collected, the stronger his suspicions became. Someone had been controlling the flow of information around his father. Someone had been shaping what Robert saw, heard, and believed. The question was whether that influence extended all the way to the will itself. At the same time, Jason Carter appeared increasingly confident. Within days of inheriting control of major company assets, he began making aggressive changes. Senior executives were replaced. Long-standing business strategies were abandoned. Several employees who had remained loyal to Michael suddenly found themselves pushed aside. The speed of these decisions alarmed investors. It also raised another uncomfortable question. Why did Jason seem so prepared? Most heirs spend months adjusting to unexpected responsibilities. Jason behaved like someone who had known exactly what was coming. Michael noticed it. So did many others. Yet proving anything would require evidence, and evidence remained frustratingly out of reach. Then came another surprise. The anonymous photograph Michael had received continued bothering him. He studied it repeatedly. Every detail mattered: the clothing, the background, and the expressions. Eventually, he noticed something written faintly on the back: a location, an address. The writing had faded over time, making it difficult to read. But after careful examination, the address pointed to a property located several hours outside the city. The property no longer belonged to the Carter family. In fact, records suggested it had been abandoned years earlier. Why would someone send him a photograph connected to a forgotten location? What significance could it possibly hold? The answer remained unclear. Yet Michael sensed the photograph was not random. Someone wanted him looking in a specific direction. While Michael searched for answers, Daniel Harris continued examining the estate documents. Late one evening, he compared the final will against earlier drafts stored in secure archives. At first, the differences appeared minor. A changed clause here, a revised sentence there. Then he found something that made him stop. One section had been rewritten entirely. The language concerning Michael's inheritance differed dramatically from previous versions. More importantly, the change appeared unusually recent. Daniel stared at the pages for several minutes. If the revision was legitimate, there was no issue. But if it had been introduced improperly, the consequences could be enormous. Suddenly, the anonymous letter no longer felt like a prank. It felt like a warning. As tension grew, Michael made a decision that would alter everything. He hired a private investigator named Ethan Brooks, a former law enforcement officer known for handling complex financial cases. Ethan reviewed the available information and quickly reached a conclusion. And the inheritance dispute was only the surface layer of a much larger story. Somewhere beneath the legal paperwork, family rivalries, and corporate power struggles lay a hidden truth. Finding it would require patience. It would require digging into decades of records. And it would require following evidence wherever it led, even if that evidence pointed toward people Michael never wanted to suspect. What none of them knew was that the first major breakthrough was closer than anyone realized. Because hidden inside an old storage facility on the edge of town sat dozens of boxes that had not been opened in years. And inside those boxes was information capable of destroying everything Victoria Carter and Jason Carter had worked so hard to protect. But before Michael could reach that discovery, and someone else would learn, he was getting dangerously close to the truth. The warning signs appeared almost immediately. 2 days after hiring investigator Ethan Brooks, Michael Carter noticed something unusual. A black SUV remained parked outside his apartment building for nearly 6 hours. When he left for meetings, the vehicle followed at a distance. When he stopped for lunch, it parked across the street. Ethan confirmed the suspicion after reviewing security footage. Someone was watching Michael. Whether it was meant to intimidate him or gather information remained unclear. But one thing was certain. Whoever had sent the anonymous photograph and whoever wanted the truth hidden were now moving closer together. Michael had spent months wondering whether he was imagining things. Now he knew he wasn't. Someone was nervous. Someone was afraid of what he might discover. And that realization only strengthened his determination. Ethan wasted no time. The address written on the back of the photograph led them to an abandoned farmhouse located on property once connected to the Carter family. The building had been neglected for years. Broken windows covered with dust looked out over empty fields. Most people would have driven past without giving it a second glance. Yet records revealed that Robert Carter continued paying storage fees linked to the property long after everyone assumed it had been abandoned. Inside a locked structure behind the farmhouse, Ethan discovered exactly what he had been hoping for: row after row of sealed boxes. Some contained financial records, others contained personal correspondence. Several were labeled only with dates, and Michael felt his pulse quicken as they opened the first container. The deeper they looked, the more extraordinary the discovery became. One box contained journals written by Robert Carter over nearly 2 decades. Another held dozens of letters addressed to Michael but never mailed. There were photographs, audio recordings, legal files, and handwritten notes. Some documents described business strategies, others detailed family disagreements. Yet the most important materials focused on Robert's growing concerns regarding control of his estate. Entry after entry revealed a man becoming increasingly worried about the people around him. Robert repeatedly referenced pressure from family members. He described situations where documents appeared without explanation. He wrote about meetings he never requested and decisions he never approved. Most alarming of all, he documented fears that someone was attempting to isolate him from those he trusted. Michael sat silently for hours, reading page after page. Each entry felt like hearing his father's voice again. Then they found the journal entry that changed everything. The entry had been written 4 months before Robert's death. In it, Robert specifically referenced concerns about revisions being made to estate documents. He questioned whether certain instructions reflected his actual wishes. He even noted that he intended to create backup copies of critical paperwork in case anything happened to the originals. Ethan immediately recognized the significance. If Robert suspected interference, then the validity of the final will became a much larger issue. They photographed every page and delivered copies to Daniel Harris. When the attorney reviewed the materials, his concerns intensified. The anonymous letter suddenly made perfect sense. Someone had known the final will contained problems. The next breakthrough came from forensic document experts. After weeks of examination, they delivered a conclusion that sent shockwaves through everyone involved. The signature on the final version of Robert Carter's will contained inconsistencies that could not easily be explained. The differences were subtle but significant. Pressure patterns varied. Certain letter formations did not match verified samples. The experts stopped short of making definitive accusations, but their findings raised serious doubts. Those doubts quickly evolved into legal action. Courts authorized further review. Financial records were subpoenaed. Family members were questioned. And what had begun as an inheritance dispute was rapidly transforming into a full-scale investigation. Victoria Carter reacted aggressively. Through attorneys, she denied every allegation. She insisted Robert's final wishes were legitimate. She accused Michael of refusing to accept reality. Publicly, Jason supported her. Privately, however, cracks were beginning to appear. Investigators uncovered communications suggesting Jason had knowledge of estate planning meetings long before Robert's death. Several witnesses contradicted portions of his statements. Pressure mounted. The family that once projected an image of unity now looked increasingly fractured. Former employees began speaking openly. Business associates shared information they had previously kept to themselves. Every new revelation pushed the story further into the public spotlight, and yet the greatest discovery remained hidden. Among the boxes from the storage facility, Ethan found a receipt connected to a safety deposit box at a private bank. The document had been overlooked initially because it appeared unrelated to the estate. Upon closer inspection, however, the date matched one of Robert's journal entries discussing contingency plans. Michael and Daniel immediately sought access. The legal process took weeks. During that time, speculation reached a fever pitch. News outlets covered every development. Financial analysts debated the future of the Carter empire. Family members stopped speaking publicly. Everyone seemed to understand that whatever sat inside that safety deposit box could determine the outcome of everything. The day it was finally opened, nobody spoke for several moments. Inside were legal documents, the personal letters, and a sealed video recording addressed specifically to Michael. Daniel reviewed the paperwork first. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. Then he looked up. The documents represented a second will, a completely different will, one that dramatically altered the distribution of Robert's estate. Michael stared at the papers in disbelief. According to these instructions, Robert intended for ownership of the company to be shared fairly among family members. There was no mention of $1. There was no disinheritance. There was no rejection. Everything Michael believed about his father's final wishes collapsed in an instant. But there was more, far more. The second will transferred a large tract of land exclusively to Michael. And the property had been purchased decades earlier and largely forgotten by everyone involved. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable. Thousands of acres located outside a rapidly expanding metropolitan area. Yet attached to the documents was additional information. Development plans, infrastructure proposals, government approvals, economic forecasts. Daniel's eyes widened. The land was worth a fortune, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. Its value exceeded the family company's worth. For years, everyone had focused on the corporation, believing it represented the heart of the Carter fortune. In reality, Robert had quietly protected an asset that would become the family's most valuable holding. Victoria and Jason were stunned when they learned the truth, that the son they attempted to erase had inherited the single most valuable asset in the entire estate. Yet even then, one mystery remained: the photograph, the faded image that started everything. Why had someone risked sending it? The answer emerged from Robert's final recorded message. Michael watched the video alone. His father appeared older and weaker than he remembered, but his voice remained steady. Robert spoke about mistakes, about family, about trust. Then he explained the photograph. The woman standing beside him was Michael's grandmother. The child in the image was Robert himself. The property Michael inherited had belonged to their family for generations before economic hardship forced earlier relatives to sell portions of it. Robert spent years quietly buying the land back piece by piece, but he believed preserving it was one of the most important responsibilities of his life. The inheritance was never about money. It was about legacy. Then Robert addressed the question that haunted Michael for months. No matter what happens after I'm gone, never believe I stopped loving you. Michael broke down as he listened. For nearly a year, he had carried the belief that his father rejected him. Every sleepless night, every painful memory, every doubt, all of it stemmed from the idea that Robert intentionally erased him from the family legacy. Now he knew the truth. His father had been trying to protect him. The legal battles continued for months afterward. Courts reviewed evidence, settlements were negotiated, additional findings emerged. While some questions remained debated, one fact became impossible to dispute. The story presented at the original will reading did not reflect Robert Carter's true intentions. Victoria faced serious legal and financial consequences. Jason's reputation suffered irreparable damage. The company underwent major restructuring. Relationships across the family collapsed. But for Michael, the outcome was about far more than money. He gained something far more valuable: the truth about his father, the truth about his family, and the truth about himself. 1 year later, Michael visited his father's grave carrying a copy of the photograph that had started everything. He stood there quietly for several minutes before placing it beside the headstone. No reporters, no lawyers, no investigators, just a son and the memory of his father. For a long time, Michael believed inheritance was about wealth. He believed success was measured by ownership, assets, and titles. The events that followed taught him something entirely different. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's knowing who truly loved you. It's knowing who fought for you when nobody else could see it. And it's finding the courage to keep moving forward after discovering that the people closest to you were capable of betrayal. So now the question comes to you. If you were Michael Carter, after everything that happened, after learning the truth, after uncovering decades of deception, would you forgive Victoria and Jason? Or would some betrayals remain impossible to forget? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you thought this story was unbelievable, wait until you hear the next one. Because the next family's secret remained buried for 40 years before a single envelope exposed everything.